All right, Joseph LaMagna is here. I don't think that intro was supposed to play, but I'm still learning the ropes of YouTube here. This is my second official podcast on YouTube ever, long overdue. But I feel right at home talking golf with you once again, my friend. So welcome in. Happy New Year's. Are you a big reflection or goals guy at all? How are you feeling as we turn the page to 2025?
I actually I'm not the biggest on resolutions and goals, but I do like to reflect at the end of the year and it kind of rejuvenates me. I don't know how you feel. I feel very ready for this golf season in a way that I have felt pretty much every year except last year. Going into last year, I didn't have the same enthusiasm for I kind of have it back. So I'm really excited. The only caveat I have to give people off the top here is that you're catching me with an active case of strep throat, and I'm I think I'm about at the end, so I should be good. But if my voice cracks or anything today, you don't get to hold it against me. I have at least one legitimate excuse. But I'm really excited about the stuff that I've prepped, and I'm very excited to hear what yours are as well. So I'm just excited for this pod.
Well, you sound great. I wouldn't have noticed had you not say anything, and I feel the same way, by the way. I think part of it has to do, obviously, I'm pretty invigorated about starting this company, right? So this, you know, Inside Sports Network is something I've been building my career towards pretty much for the past 4 to 5 years, and I know I've had a bunch of conversations with you about that over the past year. So kind of that this has been my baby and how hard I've worked on this, and so to see it come to life has been pretty awesome. I think my excitement is a lot about that. I don't know if there's anything in the professional golf world that has actually happened between now and, let's say, September, last time we were fully engaged in the professional golf scene, that has necessarily engaged me further than I already was in 2024. Certainly wasn't the crypto.com showdown. It certainly wasn't any new events or new golf courses on the PGA Tour. But to intro us into what we're going to talk about today, it's going to be a very loose, casual season preview. I mean, I told you, and I'm going in completely blind. So, like you said, I'm really excited to hear what you have to say. But there's no real set rules. I basically told you come in with 3 to 5 things. I think I have 4 really good topics that I'm buzzing on. 3 to 5 things that you are excited for in professional golf in 2025, whether that's excited to track, excited to watch, excited to follow, broader storylines that you're fascinated to see how they play out in 2025. So that's kind of the format of what we're talking about today, and I'm sure there might be some overlap in some of our topics, but should we just dive in? You want to get us going?
Yeah, let's go. I don't know if I necessarily all of mine are things I'm excited for. I prepped like 5 big storylines I think are most compelling
Okay,
in 2025, and then maybe like an honorable mention or two. But we're
cool.
probably on the same page.
Cool. Lead us off, buddy.
All right. I think one of the biggest stories this year, and maybe to your audience, this is less of a hot take, but will we ever hear from Jordan Spieth again? To me, is one of the biggest questions of 2025, right? We're talking about a player who, when he came out, was generational and was winning at an early age, youngest to do a bunch of different things, stacking up major championships. And I mean, Andy, he's been largely irrelevant. One of the most popular players in the sport. I have a couple stats on him I'd be happy to throw at you. Like I had mentioned this, we did a pod on him recently on Fried Egg. Since the start of 2022, Jordan Spieth has played in 12 majors. He's been within 7 of the 54-hole lead just twice, and each of those was a 7-shot deficit. So hasn't been closer than 7 in a major since the start of 2022. He's played 47 majors in his career now. He's been within 6 of the 54-hole lead 12 times. So none of those are in the last 3 years. Like we're getting a mounting body of evidence that we may never hear from Jordan Spieth again. He's coming off a wrist injury, which maybe is reason for people to be optimistic, but I think that's also a little bit scary. Like we might have one of the biggest stars in the game who's just completely a non-factor at age 31. So to me, that's a huge story, even though he's not one of the top names in the world right now.
Okay, I'm glad you brought this up. First of all, I already texted you this a week or 2 ago, but I loved your deep dive on Spieth. Anything that gets you and Andy and Kyle talking golf together is, I will inhale pretty quickly. And I've been thinking about him a fair amount as well, particularly because I'm one of those crazy golf history guys that has my pyramid and likes to think about the broader context of everything. And if you look at Jordan Spieth's career arc, it's fairly unprecedented in terms of the trajectory that he was on when he was around 23, 24 years old. And there's another guy who was on quite the trajectory at 23, 24 years old that I will be talking about later in the pod. But I think my follow-up question to you on this would be, what does success look like for Jordan Spieth in 2025? Like, what would need to happen for him in 2025 for you to say, okay, he's back on track?
I think given his pedigree, anything short of being a top, like personally, I don't even think being a top 5 player in the world is even really possible at this point anymore.
I agree.
That so I think being like the 8th best player in the world would absolutely be a huge success. I just don't think it's going to happen. And as much as I like Jordan Spieth, whatever the market price would be on Jordan's future of what the next 5 years look like here's the Vegas line in any kind of metric of success, I would be taking the other side of the under in wins or the over in world ranking. Like I just am very pessimistic about how this pans out. So I guess to directly answer your question, viewing him as a bona fide top 10 player in the world would be success. And I just don't think there's a very strong chance of that happening.
On my golf pyramid right now, I have him as the 35th most accomplished golfer of all time. So that essentially means that if he never hit another high leverage golf shot in a competitive pro tournament, he would still retire as, give or take, between the 30th and 40th most accomplished professional golfer of all time. Now, the majors are doing a lot of work there. There's just not a lot of guys that have 3 majors. Okay. So he's got 13 wins, 3 majors, 4 major runner-ups, 14 major top 10s. And as you mentioned, the lion's share of that work is coming prior to the last 3 years. I mean, right now he's looking at like a Hale Irwin, Nick Price comp. Okay. Like 3 majors, 20-ish wins, which, leaves you give or take around, a great player of your era, but around the 30s for all time. And I think we would really be needing to look at another major championship for Spieth for him to re-enter being talked about with the Brooks and Rorys as one of the great contemporary players in the post Tiger era. I mean, do you think he wins another major? I mean, the major over under right now is probably 3.5, right? Like if he wins 0 more in his career, you're not shocked. And if he steals another Open Championship along the way, or maybe a Masters, you're probably not overly surprised either.
Yeah, that's how I am. I think if you get some elements involved and he's on the right side of a wave split and he finds himself in the mix with a couple long putts, like it wouldn't shock me. But what would shock me is for him to be a consistent, 3 top 10s in a major in a year or something like that. I mean, one more stat for you that's not going to shock you based on any of the ones I just gave you, but he's had a lead or co-lead after 54 holes in 6 majors. They came in 2014, 2015 twice, 2016, 2017, and 2018. Like it's getting to be a long time ago. So
Yeah.
I think those days are past us, and probably his chances of future success are lower than a lot of people necessarily want to admit. But again, I think talking to your audience as people who follow golf closely week in and week out, like he's not really on anybody's radar as a threat in 2025, most likely. So I'm probably not saying anything too provocative here.
Well, this Spieth is, I like to think of him hand in hand at least a little bit in terms of they're similar ages. Spieth is a little bit younger. But I think back to, the 2012-ish to 2017 period, when these two were coming up sort of hand in hand. And it looked like Rory had the belt for a little bit, and then it was given back to Spieth and then back to Rory. And that's the guy I wanted to talk about today. I had him a little bit later, but since you brought up Spieth, I thought this was a good time to give you my Rory question.
Let's
So
go.
Rory's he turns 36 years old in May. Since COVID, Joseph, Rory's played in 19 majors. He's 11 top 10. So he's got over a 50% top 10 percentage over a fairly large sample size. I mean, compared to Spieth, Rory has been a lot more relevant in the professional golf landscape over the past couple of years, despite not getting over the hump and winning that elusive first major in what would now be 10 plus years. And we've been doing this shit or get off the pot mode with Rory for a decade when it comes to majors. But the fact that we are going to Quail Hollow this year, the golf course that he has played better at than any other golf course in his entire career. I mean, Rory's played 50 rounds at Quail Hollow, Joseph, almost 3 true strokes gained per round. Like Rory, who is one of the 20 greatest golfers of all time, raises his phenomenally high baseline by close to a stroke per round at Quail Hollow. Okay. Um, and so we've already had some early season predictions, and it's like, okay, Rory at Quail Hollow, this seems like the most obvious thing of all time, right? But I think some of these major championships where Rory is supposed to win haven't necessarily been doing him all too many favors, right? Whether it's Valhalla, Royal Liverpool, Royal Portrush, Oak Hill, Kiowa, all these places that Rory's either won at in the past or he has some sort of emotional connection to, he typically underperforms at the ones that everyone pencils him in for. And I am just so fascinated to see how he performs at Quail Hollow this year, because it being in May, it's going to have the same agronomy as it does for the Wells Fargo. I don't think the setup is going to be all that demonstrably different from the golf course that he sees every year for the Wells Fargo. And then, of course, if the hype machine wasn't revved up to the max already, oh, by the way, we're going back to Northern Ireland for Royal Portrush for the Open Championship, which, by the way, Rory is one of the biggest reasons that we have an Open Championship in Northern Ireland today, right? Like, Royal Portrush didn't have an Open for 50 years. And then with the success of players like Rory McIlroy and Darren Clark winning an Open Championship, motivated the R&A to include a great golf course in Royal Portrush in Northern Ireland back in the Rhoda. So I got to say, Joseph, I'm fascinated to hear your thoughts on Rory heading into 2025. And we have at least two, obviously the Masters with the Grand Slam is its whole own thing, but I'm pretty fascinated to see how Rory tackles these specific major venues in 2025.
This was one of my bullet points as well. I had it at later, but I like the way you're mentioning it with Spieth, because I think what you're kind of going for there is these career arc, analyzing a typical career arc, and only the greats are relevant for more than 5 to 8 years, right? Rory
Yeah.
McIlroy is clearly one of those players. He gets a lot of flack for not getting it across the finish line, which is deserved. But Rory, to me, how I'm viewing him going into 2025 is fairly simple. I think Quail Hollow, which is about as distance friendly as it gets, it's not a
Mhm.
surprise that Rory does well there. Really good chance to win. Wouldn't be shocked at all if he wins. I think Oakmont is a very good golf course for Rory McIlroy. I'm
Completely
less
agree.
on the Portrush and even some of those courses you mentioned where like we thought Rory might do well, whether it's a Troon or a Kiowa. Like honestly, the game was way different when Rory had success on those golf courses 10, 15 years ago, and how his distance kind of fit golf courses. I think those are way worse fits for him now, especially in the wind. I don't love seeing Rory stand up on a tee with driver on a hole where there's trouble, like serious trouble, both right and left, and wind. Like that just scares me when Rory's on the tee. You don't get that at Oakmont, and you don't get that at Quail Hollow. So if you could make a market that was like his chances of winning either the PGA or the US Open, I'd be high Rory and think, yeah, I'm a little skeptical that he'll get it across the finish line because he has these pretty boneheaded mistakes often, whether it's a missed iron or a missed tee shot that, like he could go in the water on 7 at Quail Hollow and it wouldn't shock anybody. Like those big numbers are always kind of in play, but I would be higher than I'd be pretty willing to bet on Rory in the US Open and the PGA, and then much less interested in the Masters and the Open Championship. So I don't know exactly where that nets me out, but I think it is one of the biggest stories coming into 2025 because Quail Hollow should be his best chance at a major in quite some time. I'd say probably since Oak Hill, which he played badly and finished tied for
Yeah.
7th.
Yeah.
To me, this is the best set of major championship venues that Rory's probably, when you consider his age in the set of venues, like 2025 is going to be his best chance to win a major for the rest of his career. So it's absolutely story 1A or 1B or however you want to look at it.
Do you think we said that about Valhalla last year too, though? And then it kind of turned out to be a little bit easier than we expected and ended up being more dependent on putting. But I think my point is, how many times do we have to say this with Rory before, our better judgment prevails and we stop giving him the benefit of the doubt that this is the place that he should win? Because I agree with you wholeheartedly on Quail Hollow. And I actually think what you were talking about made me think about not necessarily a fork in the road moment for Rory McIlroy, but the first time where I remember saying to myself, okay, if Rory's going to win more major championships in his career, he needs to add something to his game, right? And what I'm talking about is that Friday afternoon round at Augusta National. I don't know if you remember this. I was on property for it, so I remember this. This is one of the most memorable rounds for me in the 2024 season. But Rory, Scheffler, and Xander were paired together last year in the opening 2 rounds of the Masters, and they were playing on Friday afternoon, and they got some of the tougher conditions that players had seen, not just in the Masters over the last decade, but on the PGA Tour that entire season. I mean, Friday afternoon, the golf course had fully baked out. The scoring average was well above 3 strokes over par, and it was pretty windy. And I remember sitting there or I was walking with them, but I remember watching the juxtaposition between Scottie Scheffler answering those questions and Rory McIlroy answering those questions. And a lot of those questions were like, okay, you got to throw TrackMan out the window here. Like, how can you execute this shot that you probably didn't spend a lot of time practicing on a wide open driving range at Medalist in Florida, right? And the juxtaposition between watching Scottie have the entire answer key to that test and Rory not knowing how to answer those questions. I think he went into the water on 11 when Scheffler ended up, hitting that shot to like the fat part of the green and 2 putting. And Quail Hollow, I don't think is going to ask those types of questions. I'm not totally sure Oakmont is going to ask those types of questions. Maybe that can transition us into talking about Oakmont at some point too, because that was another one for me. And I'm super intrigued to see how that golf course plays as well. That's a whole other storyline. But I agree with you. I think that this year makes all the sense in the world for Rory McIlroy. I'm just trying to check myself on, do I sound like a broken record saying that?
Oh, I think you do sound like a broken record saying that, and I don't want to come across as like this is the year it's going to happen because I kind of for a couple years now have felt like people work themselves up at the end of every season about why Rory's going to win the next year and he doesn't deliver. Like I think he's going to make the mistakes in the big spots that keep him from winning. So I'm not trying to say that I think Rory McIlroy is going to win. It's just it is a huge story, and if it's going to happen, I suspect it will happen at one of those 2 venues, and I think there's a chance of it. Is it a better chance than Scottie or Xander? No. Like Rory has a tendency to bring the big miss into play, not even just in crucial moments, like in early parts of major championships. So, yeah, I think to the Valhalla thing a little bit. I think Quail Hollow is a little bit better of a
Me as
fit.
well.
I also think some of the swing changes Rory was doing throughout the year and seems to have settled in at the end of 2024 this past fall, like seems to kind of clicked. We'll see what happens. I'd still be picking Scottie ahead of him, still be picking Xander ahead of him, but those are two very distance friendly venues that Rory McIlroy, if he plays well, he should have a crack at. Yeah, I don't know that I'd want to take a stance that I think stick my neck out that Rory's going to win one of them, but these are his best chances.
Well, statistically, and this can put a bow on the Rory discussion, but for the last 5 years, you've basically been able to pencil in that Rory is going to be at least involved in 2 out of the 4 majors every year, sometimes 3. And so of those 19 majors that he's played since COVID, there were 6 of them where he was like really, really involved and had a real opportunity to win. So again, over the last 5 years with Rory, he's top 10ing in 2 to 3 majors per year and giving himself a real opportunity to win a major in at least one of the 4 every year. He also turns 36 in May, and I'm not necessarily going to say that that number means that he's past his prime. I mean, Phil Mickelson won all 6 of his majors after the age of 34, and 4 of those 6 after his 36th birthday. So Phil Mickelson won 4 of his 6 majors at an older than how old Rory McIlroy is right now. There are definitely some great play. There are examples of phenomenal play from some of the world's all-time great golfers after the age of 36. I mean, Jack Nicklaus won 6 majors after his 35th birthday. There's multiple players that have played some of the best golf of their entire career in their late 30s and early 40s. But I also think the game is changing. I think the prime of great golfers is shifting younger. I think the game is getting younger. So I just don't know, you know?
Well, I'll put it this way, maybe succinctly. Quail Hollow, I think Rory McIlroy is in the top 4 going into the final day, probably in the final group. Part of that is why I don't love Quail Hollow, and that it's pretty much a bludgeon the ball fest. And if he stays out of the water on 7 and out of the water on 18, like I think Rory's going to be in that final group. He's bombing it past guys. So there's not that much trouble for him to get in out there. That's the opportunity. So 2025 as a whole, I don't know that I'm necessarily high or low on Rory, but Quail Hollow, like that's a really good opportunity. And I'm go ahead and book it now. Like that's a great chance for him to finish top 5 in a major.
The other thing I would say about Quail too is when we played the PGA there in 2017, when it was in August, we had that hot, sticky Bermuda rough. Since it's being played in May, you're going to get the same agronomy that you get for the Wells Fargo, which is the overseeded rough, which is actually a much lower of a missed fairway penalty. So it's actually giving more credence to the distance over accuracy debate, in my opinion, as well, because the overseeded Bermuda rough, for if you've ever played golf in the Southeast, the overseeded Bermuda rough versus, and I know you probably know a little bit of this as well, being in Austin, but the overseeded Bermuda rough versus like the patchy, hot, sticky, non-overseeded Bermuda rough that you see sometimes in the South in August makes a massive difference.
They added a back tee on 16
Yeah.
last year. Rory's one of the few that could still hit it over it. Like there's a lot of advantages there. So that's the one to watch.
Do you want to go into Oakmont now, or do you want to go in a different direction? Because there was something there's a specific storyline with Oakmont that I am fascinated to get your opinion on, but I could also save it for later.
I'm not that far into Oakmont research. So, I mean, I have some preliminary thoughts on it, but I don't care. We can go there. Mine are mostly player driven storylines. So whatever you want to do.
Let's do Oakmont now, and then we'll circle back to more players because I have another player or two that I want to talk about as well. I'm really excited to see how Oakmont plays this year. I think it is pound for pound one of the best major championship venues that we have, and I think that in many ways, it has a very similar ethos to Winged Foot, but is a much better version of Winged Foot, right? So you think about Winged Foot and Oakmont, both of these golf courses, the star of the show is their green complexes, right? I mean, both pride themselves on having giant, heavily sloped, heavily undulating greens that are really fast, right? Some of the faster, more delicate greens where you really have to be above the hole. I mean, if you go back and watch, I would highly recommend this. in your US Open research, but they have the entire final round of the 2016 US Open that Dustin Johnson won on YouTube.
It's
And
like
it's a
8 hours.
yeah, it's like 8 hours, and the front 9 is a really good watch because there are a lot of holes on that front 9 where, like, Jason Kokrak, for example, 2 is a drivable 4, and, his drive was within 7 feet of the pin and then ended up coming back down off a massive slope, and he ended up making bogey and 4 putting. Like, there's some really fun and funky stuff going on with the greens at Oakmont. The thing that I'm most fascinated by is that since the 2016 US Open, there was a Gil Hanse restoration. Okay. And Gil Hanse, in many ways, has become kind of the modern open doctor, right? He's completed restorations at Los Angeles Country Club, at Brookline, at Winged Foot, at Southern Hills. Like, Gil Hanse knows how to design a modern championship major golf course.
I might
Now,
throw the challenge flag on that.
you disagree there? You're not a Hanse guy?
All I'll say is I spent a little time at PGA Frisco recently, and I'm not
Okay, well, that's
inspired about.
an original Hanse design.
I mean, that doesn't qualify as knowing how to set up a major test.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it's a little bit different in that the canvas is there, versus Hanse with Frisco is trying to create his own thing. But I mean, I love Hanse's original designs too. So if you're a little bit critical of Frisco, I'm excited and interested to hear those critiques because I know nothing about that golf course yet. And I'm excited to go play it before the next PGA there. Uh, what I was going to talk about with Hanse's restorations, though, is there's one notable restoration that he didn't get right in the last couple of years, and that's the winged foot one. And I don't necessarily want to say that he didn't get it right. Maybe that language is being too hard on him. But what happened at winged foot was not what he expected to happen at winged foot. Like, if you read between the lines in some of Hanse's interviews, like, he was not pleased with what Bryson did to winged foot, and he did not expect Bryson to be able to do that to winged foot. So fast forward 2 or 3 years after winged foot, and he gets another opportunity at a US Open restoration at a golf course that in many ways is a very similar canvas to winged foot. So my question is, do you think that this is Hanse's redemptive arc of not allowing Bryson to do what he did to winged foot? Or do you think that Bryson's strategy at winged foot, because it's a very similar golf course in many ways in terms of the fact that, like, you can get away with some big misses at Oakmont, okay? And one of the things that he really had to focus on was, like, at the 2021 US Amateur, guys were hitting off alternate fairways left and right, and that is like a dream for a player like Bryson DeChambeau. So one of the things that I'm fascinated to watch at winged foot at Oakmont in 2025 is how much do we see Hanse's restoration attempt to, again, get some redemption and guard against the bomb and gouge method? I think that's a fun storyline to track.
Yeah, you just said a lot of different things in there to react to. I think we're talking in December. Come back to me when we get a little bit closer to the US Open with more solidified takes around how the golf course will play. What those two, I like that you're calling out Winged Foot and Oakmont because those are both very important golf courses to the USGA. And we are at a point where straight up distance and technology is completely out of proportion with when those golf courses were designed. And in my view, and I think we share this view, way out of proportion with where any golf course should be designed. Like, even if you were to build
Yes.
one now. So that needs to get reined back in. It probably will over the next 20 years. There's going to be a minor rollback in 2028 that takes effect, but not that substantial. Like, you're taking a historic golf course, Oakmont, that's known for being punitive, and
Mhm.
having the USGA, like, if they decimate that place, the USGA, it would probably be good because it might spark some outrage, but they're going to do it. They have to do it all with the greens, right? These are massive undulating greens that they're going to crank all the way up. So much of that's going to of the test that week is going to be dependent on the moisture. If it rains coming into the week or something like that, then that's opening itself up for the
Mhm.
Oakmont's biggest defense to be neutered a little bit. But I agree with the characterization of it being like winged foot. I think the Dustin Johnson, Bryson, Rory type dispersion where you're a little wild sometimes, but you can let the driver rip. That's the type of player that's going to win. So will it be bomb and gougey? Like some of that's going to be dependent on the conditions, but it's going to be very distance friendly, I believe.
I agree, and I think that one of the things to keep in mind too, in 2016, it was actually pretty soft. I mean, the joke at Oakmont, and I got in touch with a member when I was doing my research for my 2025 majors preview, and he was like, "Yeah, the golf course didn't play anywhere near we wanted it to play in
Oakmont.
2016." Yeah, at Oakmont, and the golf course, like 3 guys shot under par. I'm not worried as much about the scoring at Oakmont. Like winged foot 2, Bryson was Bryson shot 5 under par and second place was even par. Okay. So I think the infrastructure in terms of the length of the golf course and the speed of the greens is there to protect par. What I'm more fascinated is the roadmap to getting there, right? Is the roadmap that Bryson took to getting to that 5 underscore at Winged Foot going to be available at Oakmont, if that makes sense?
It should be there. And to your earlier point with the alternate fairways, I do think there's a reasonable chance we're going to get internal out of bounds at Oakmont. They are not going to let that
Are you
happen.
pro? Are you pro internal OB?
1000% I am
Yeah,
pro
me too.
internal OB. And I think the people who are against internal OB, if they're also against a rollback, like I don't know what to tell you. Like what do you want to happen then? Because we're taking golf courses that were built over 100 years ago, and of course other corridors are open to these guys now. They're swinging massive drivers. So, and you don't like it just doesn't make any, you got to do something. So I'm 1000% in favor of internal out of bounds when it's necessary.
I agree wholeheartedly. It reminds me of the tweet that I sent out when people were criticizing LACC, where I was like, I need the people that hated Winged Foot, but also hated LACC to design me a golf course because these things cannot be the same. You cannot have this take, but also have this take. So anyway, that's all I got on Oakmont. Take us in a different direction.
All right, this is the one that take that's kind of crystallized for me over the last couple of weeks where I want to stick my neck out. Like this player is going to have a big year. Not a no name, but I think this is the breakout year for Ludwig Ober. And that may sound stupid because he's already one of the best players in the world, but I think Ludwig is on the trajectory to be one of the best players in the game, not to be the 10th best player in the game, but to be third or fourth, like right up there, potentially picking off a major this year. You look at what he's put together in his young career. He's 25. When he came out in 2023, came out in the summer, was immediately good coming off of a strong college career, won twice, one on the DP World Tour, and then added a win at the RSM. Not the biggest wins, but won right away. 2024, his first year playing majors, he finished his solo second at Augusta in his major debut. Andy was just looking back through this in preparation for this pod. I'd kind of forgot he was 3 clear of third place in this major. So he loses to Scottie by 4, but I mean, in his major debut, he's 3 clear of third place. Like that's pretty remarkable. Then he misses the cut at Valhalla, kind of an asterisk of a setup, as I know we share that view, but that's not to totally dismiss it. But sure, his second major. Third major, he finishes T12 at the US Open, and then he misses the cut at Troon on a setup where he was on the wrong side of a pretty significant wave split. So first year playing majors, he's 24. Not bad. And his other finishes all year in 2024 were remarkably consistent. He ninth at Torrey, second at Pebble, eighth at the Players, fifth at Memorial, fourth at the Scottish, second at the BMW. Like Ludwig put together a remarkably consistent year. Great driver of the golf ball, great ball striker. I think we're talking about him as a no doubter top 5
Mhm.
player in the world after 2025. I don't know how ambitious that sounds, but I think this is everything points to me for the year of Ludwig. Not over Scotty, obviously, but like a serious outbreak.
If you had to buy stock in either Ludwig or Victor going forward. You can only buy stock in one. Are you going Ludwig?
I have a take in the back of my head that I might be ready to label Victor Hovland just a guy. So yes.
Yeah. We're recording this on Monday, early afternoon after the news that Hovland broke up with Mayo again. So it seems like he's still sort of finding his footing in terms of who he is as a golfer, which is surprising to me because was at one point a top 3 player in the world, and it just seems like he's in tinker zone. Back to Ludwig. I'm with you. I think there's a lot to be bullish on with Ludwig in terms of I think the ball striking and the driving, we know what that is, right? The upside is there for him to be one of the top 3 drivers of the ball in the world, as well as one of the top 3 to 5 middle to long iron players in the world as well. One of the things that I always remember about Ludwig, he led the Masters in putting on debut. And I know putting's a little bit less sticky of a stat than driving and approach play. It's a little bit harder to predict in terms of the variance that comes week to week with that. But Augusta is a golf course that people talk about. It's like these are the hardest greens on the PGA Tour to figure out. And you need sometimes years of experience to learn those greens. And the fact that Ludwig gained 7+ strokes putting at the Masters on debut. And I remember he played a practice round with Rory on Wednesday of Augusta, and they shot like a best ball 31 on he tore that place to shreds. And I think that he will win a Masters, before it's all said and done. But I think there's some pretty cool putting upside with Ludwig as well. Short game, he kind of chipped his way out of Pinehurst, if you remember that as well. Like he was leading the field in ball striking over the first 2 rounds at Pinehurst and had a couple blowups around the green. But the full package is there. The full package is there. I've got nothing to add but praise.
I mean, it's rare that somebody is truly on a trajectory to be a top 5 player, but like this profiles like one, right? Like it's always easy to take this won't happen side of things, right? Like oftentimes players who look like they're on pace to be a top 5 player in the world, like the natural downturns of the game kind of remove them from that. But if there was somebody who I'd be willing to stick my neck out as like that's a top 5 player in the world a year or 2 from now, obviously you have a couple names like Scottie, but Ludwig's right at the top of the list for me. And again, this is his first 2024 was his first time through most of these courses, and he put up really good results. Like I think there's a chance he's the second best player in the world next year.
Yeah. I don't think that's crazy whatsoever. Do you have Bryson at all? Do you have Bryson on your list at all?
I have honorable mention A and honorable mention B, and honorable mention B is like how good are Bryson and Jon Rahm. So I didn't have a ton to say about it, but if you have it, let's go.
I have one Bryson thing that I wanted to briefly touch on. I just continue to be very captivated by Bryson's career trajectory. I think the YouTube stuff with Bryson is really interesting to me. He has turned into one of the most successful golf content creators on the internet. And I've checked out his YouTube videos. They don't totally work for me. I think for me personally, I'm much more fascinated to watch Bryson navigate professional golf tournaments than I am, to see him break course records at like a Muni. But I actually think I'm probably in the minority there. I think way more people watch Bryson on YouTube than they watch him on Live. And I'm just really curious to see where this goes, because the YouTube stuff, like if Bryson never wanted to play professional golf again, he could have a full-on career where he just did YouTube and TikTok content and he would make millions of dollars doing that. I think he's fiercely competitive, so I don't really worry that the YouTube stuff means that he cares less about winning majors or that it's going to distract him from winning majors. But can you think of any other athlete that has had like a full-on other media career at the same time that they were at the peak of their professional prime. I mean, Shaq did some movies. I guess there's some NBA players that released rap albums, but it's kind of wild that one of the best golfers in the world in the middle of his competitive prime has this whole other burgeoning career that he's also navigating. It's one of the things I was thinking about when I was doing the research for this.
A lot of directions to go there. I mean, it almost couldn't happen until recently, right? With just
Yeah.
some of the overhead that's involved, how that's been sort of democratized. I mean, Jared McCain comes to mind as
Yeah.
a guy who's putting up points in the NBA. Now he's hurt, but and then filming TikToks of himself. Like a lot of NFL players having their own podcasts
Sure.
actively, right? Like Micah Parsons and other people. So
Yeah. Kelsey.
I don't really worry that it distracts Bryson in any way, but I do find that he's generally a fairly hard player to predict. But I've probably been a little lower on him than I should be, and he has the pedigree that you want. Like only true greats make it more than 5 or 8 years, and he kind of is one of those bona fide like elite amateur career. Won early on the PGA Tour, won what 4 times in 2018,
Mhm.
couple majors now. Like I don't think he's going to have a super long career, probably for physical reasons and the way his game may age as much
Yeah.
as like I don't really worry as much about his interest level waning. But yeah, I don't know. I don't think he's going to have a like the venues for the same reasons they're good for Rory. They're really good for Bryson in
Agreed.
2025. So there's reasons to be optimistic. I'm not super optimistic about what he'll look like in 2028, but I think Bryson's absolutely a top 6 to 8 player in the world potentially next year for majors. I wouldn't be higher on him than most people would probably be, but I think sometimes I get flack for that. And there are people who are like, no, Bryson's a top 5 player. I think he's probably somewhere between like 6 and 12.
More likely to win a major next year, Ludwig or Bryson? Are you
I
taking
take
Ludwig?
Ludwig.
Yeah.
I really think Ludwig. I don't want. It's so hard because like obviously the chances are against him being the second best player in the world, but I think legit chance he's the second best player in the world next year.
More likely to win a major next year, Rory or Ludwig?
I'm gonna say Ludwig because I think that Ludwig can win on all 4,
Yeah.
and I have a harder time seeing Rory win an Open Championship with wind or at Augusta. But
Yeah.
the best chance of all of them of all of those 8 major championship tries between the two of them, I think the best is Rory
It's
at Quail
Rory at
Hollow.
Quail. Yeah. I think Bryson, by the way, at Quail is
Yeah,
yeah, I think Bryson at Quail makes it
or Oakmont.
yeah. Okay, I only have one more thing to talk about. So give me what else you're buzzing on.
We've hit 3 of mine if we're including Rory. I think
Mhm.
um, one that we can breeze through because it's just an obvious one that I have to mention is like how dominant is Scottie Scheffler,
Yeah.
and I am very ready for all the since Tiger Woods talk. I think the people who are like slow down, like Tiger did it for so much longer. Well, yeah, no kidding, but no one's saying that Scottie Scheffler's had the career of Tiger Woods, but is he playing at the highest level since Tiger Woods? I'm there. I
Yeah.
already think he has been. And if he puts together another 2025 that looks like 2024, we have a true mega star who could go down as one of the best players of all time. And I don't think it's being over dramatic to say it. Nobody, no, not DJ, not Rory, not Spieth, not Day, not Kepka, none of those guys since Tiger have played to the level that Scottie Scheffler has consistently. So I think it's really exciting, and that's part of what's rejuvenating my interest in golf in 2025. It's we have somebody that goes out on Sunday and they're one back from the lead, and you can almost guarantee they're going to gain like 4 or 5 shots on the field and put up a strong Sunday performance. So I mean, you got to mention Scotty as one of the most important storylines of 2025.
Agreed. I think my question to you, how much stock does the early season injury worry you at all that he's getting off on the wrong foot? And then the switch to the claw putting grip, which worked out pretty nicely for him in a very limited sample size at the Hero. Do you view either of those as concerns as you view Scheffler heading into 2025, or we're kind of just rev up the engine? He's going to win. We have no reason to believe that he's not going to win 6, 7, 8 times again.
Putting type stuff, I don't even you can tell me anything about players changing their grips and stuff, and I don't really believe it until I see it over an extended period of time.
Yep.
Sometimes there's like a 2-week bump and then it goes away. Like
Mhm.
I don't put a lot of stock in it. It's amusing, something to track. The injury, I don't know a ton about it. From what it sounds like, he punctured his hand with glass, and it's nothing like a tendon or anything, right? Like we're
No,
just
I don't
talking
think so.
about.
I think we're talking about him missing the month of January.
So no, that does not concern me. I think the biggest risk to Scheffler is not the natural downturns of the sport, which is the biggest risk that probably most players face. I do think Scottie is a little different in his approach to golf and why we can expect consistency to persist. To me, the biggest risk to Scheffler is injury, and
Yeah.
not the hand injury, not breaking glass, but he had some back issues in college and the neck flared up at the Players last year, right? If we start to see him hold his back or something at some point, that's to me the most likely way that his career gets derailed. Otherwise, I feel fairly confident we're going to see 3 to 4 years of really good golf. Maybe not best in the world, but I think 2025 should be. If he doesn't win a major, it's a failure.
0, 1, 2, or 3 or 4 majors for Scheffler next year. And what do you think the most likely major for him to win is?
The Masters is the most likely tournament for
Repeat champions never go back to back though. It's very rare to go back to. I know you don't care about any of that stuff, and
I don't care about that
either from a data perspective. But it's happened twice in the or has Tiger in 03 or it doesn't happen very often.
Andy, how many times has there been a repeat
Players champion? I knew where you're going with that one.
So I think that sometimes there's legitimacy to that, to the extent that there are pre-tournament festivities that occupy some of your time and energy, especially. Like I actually think that can be a pretty real thing. But Scottie's built a little bit different, and the way that golf course sets up for him, Scottie, as long as he's healthy going into the Masters, it's going to be hard to beat him. So to your question, 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4. I mean, I think I'll say 1 because it's so hard to win multiple. But no, this is the least controversial statement of all time. But if he wins 2 or 3, like that wouldn't shock me either. It's potentially one of the best golfers of the last 30 years. Like second or third on that list. Like it could be.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think if I'm with you, I would say 1. I think he is. I think Oakmont, maybe not as quite as good of a spot for him as Augusta maybe, but I do expect that when it's all said and done, Scheffler is a guy with multiple US Open trophies. I think that's kind of the next 2 questions that Scottie, I'm not going to say needs to answer. He's not really in prove it mode for me at this point, but I'm really fascinated to see how he plays the US Open and the Open Championship over the next 5 years, particularly the Open Championship, because that's one that I suppose has given him the most struggles relative to the other 3. I have one more thing to talk about. It's more of an event than a player. Do you have any other players?
One other player, and then like one other honorable mention story that's not a player.
Okay. Give me your player, and then I will talk about my final thing as well.
My player is like both Nick Dunlap and Luke Clanton. Like which one of those busts out? And as high as I've been on Nick Dunlap, and I still am, he's got to get the driver under control a little bit, which I think he can. He's very young. Dude, I am so high on Luke Clanton.
Yeah.
And seeing the US Open just posted, or I guess the USGA, I don't remember exactly which Twitter handle it was, posted highlights from this past US Open, and one of them was Luke Clanton, and he hits this iron. The trajectory on it is controlled so well, and that's the thing that I've heard a lot about Clanton from people who have watched him a lot in person, is his iron control almost looks kind of like Colin Morikawa, like elite, has different shots in the bag, tons of ball speed. Like he's been an incredible driver. He's 4 top 10s already on the PGA Tour, and he hasn't turned pro. So he's going to likely turn pro next summer. and already has, I believe he's in 2 majors next year. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibilities that we're talking about Luke Clanton as a top 30 player in the world by this time next year, or maybe even a little bit better than that. But I just think it's a huge story in general. Nick Dunlap and Luke Clanton, 2 guys who aren't even 22 yet. Like what does their early trajectory look like? And could one of those guys potentially be a top 10 player in the world?
Yeah, professional transition here by me, but do you think Ryder Cup is attainable for
Oh
either of
man.
those players?
I was just I was thinking about that because we were kind of doing some predictions in the Fried Egg newsletter, and I was like, do I
Yeah.
want to say Luke Clanton gets a captain's pick? I think there's not enough time probably for Clanton to sneak in to be thought of quite that way, but I'll say no. I think it's pretty unlikely, but not out of the realm of possibilities. I don't want to bet against youth like that.
Yeah, I mean, and I'll give it away now. The last thing that I wanted to talk about was the Ryder Cup, but I think you look at that US team and you have a pretty strong top with, I would say, and you tell me if you disagree on this, but I would say Scheffler, Xander, Bryson, Colin, Cantlay, and Justin Thomas. Those top 6 feel pretty locked into me, including Justin Thomas, who made a Ryder Cup team when he was in a lot worse form than I expect him to be in 2025. And then for those final 6 spots, you start to get into, what does Brooks's 2025 look like? Sam Burns, Tony Finau, Sahith Theegala, Akshay, Wyndham Clark, and then right there, it's like Davis Thompson, Nick Dunlap, Luke Clanton. What does Will Zalatoris' 2025 look like? Does Max Griverserman keep it going? And I think that back end of the US's team is going to be really, really fun. And I think they have a cool opportunity to go with youth. I mean, like if you're the US and the final spot is like Akshay and I don't know, Billy Horschel have comparable seasons, right? Or Luke Clanton and Russell Henley have comparable seasons. Do they go with the younger guy, right? So I'm curious about that too. There was something else more specific with the European team I wanted to talk about with the Ryder Cup, but does that sound about right in terms of the way that you're looking at this US team right now in terms of who seems like a lock and where there may be some opportunities to go to fill out the rest of that roster?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest mistakes we make in Ryder Cup discourse is just locking things in too early.
Yeah.
So as anyone who follows golf knows, the professional landscape, like we're making these predictions confidently, and things are going to look wildly, wildly different by May, and they're going to look wildly different by September. So I wouldn't lock too many people in. I think the names like Xander, Scheffler. Are you? I don't know.
I think Colin's a
Colin, yeah.
pretty safe bet.
I think
I
Colin's
do.
pretty safe. I honestly think Justin Thomas is pretty safe, even
Me
though I
too.
was very against him making the team in
Me
Rome.
too.
I think Cantlay, I'm not sure is fully safe. Like, let's see how things play out. But my only issue with Clanton is just he's not going to have that much time to
Yeah.
make a statement. Like if he were turning pro now and getting starting in January, it'd be different. But Dunlap's a little bit of a different story. I think Dunlap could make it the case. The other thing, like we have to say, is Bethpage is going to be super distance friendly, and it's going to be a
Yeah.
big time driving contest. So for Luke Clanton, that's phenomenal. For Nick Dunlap, it's kind of good, but he sprays it a little bit. He could take you out of an alternate shot match. So I think he's got a better chance because he has more starts. But that 11, 12 spot, I think it's probably within the realm of possibilities. We're talking about like Brooks Koepka or Nick Dunlap, and
Yep.
that those conversations are pretty difficult.
Do you put Clanton and Dunlap's long-term prospects over Akshay? Just out of curiosity, because I'm a pretty big Akshay guy, as well as Davis Thompson for that matter.
Yeah, I don't know. I think Clanton, he really looks special.
I agree. Yeah.
It's hard to know. I'm not sure that I would necessarily put him ahead of those guys. Probably would put him ahead of, maybe would take Clanton out of that whole group, but
Mhm.
Akshay's been really good. I
Yeah.
don't. I'm not trying to come across as too low on Akshay. I think the name in there that you mentioned that's probably the most interesting with what happens this year, you mentioned a minute ago, is Sahith, and yeah, who's going to have the better 2025, like Sahith or Akshay?
Tough. That one's really hard because I do think that this is Sahith's now 3rd year on the PGA Tour or 4th year. So he's gonna have a little bit more built-in experience with the travel schedule and a lot of these PGA Tour golf courses. I think Akshay has, like, more consistent iron play already than Sahith Theegala. Sahith Theegala can still get pretty shaky with the ball striking. Um, but, you know, I think that one's really close. I'd give the nudge to Akshay, but I think it's super, super, super close.
I think I'll take Sahith there, and
Yeah.
partially because he was a little injured at the end of last summer and into the fall, and otherwise his numbers are pretty good. And
Mhm.
given his amateur career, I know Akshay also was a great amateur, but I mean Sahith's short game and putting is incredible. So if he can keep the driver in play a little bit, I think he could have a really good year, but not a super strong conviction that I would take him over Akshay. That's a fun one though, and I'd lean Sahith.
Yeah, the final thing I wanted to talk about with the Ryder Cup, I'm super excited for this Ryder Cup, and it's not even because I'm the biggest Beth Page fan in the world. It's not even because the Ryder Cup is, in my beloved. I mean, we get a little fast and loose with Long Island and New York, but it's a Ryder Cup that I will absolutely be attending at a golf course that I have spent a lot of time out over the course of my life. Um, I think this European era of this sort of snapshot of this European team is so fun. Did you watch the
Not
YouTube
yet.
documentary? Okay, so
I want to.
yeah, I'm not gonna spoil it or give too much away, but I really want you to watch that and tell me what you think because I kind of found myself and it bordered on hagiography, right? Like I think this is very biased to make the European team look as good and as cohesive as possible. But I am like totally sold on Luke Donald and Dodo Molinari like having the formula. I am completely all in that European team is in such good hands, and I know it's incredibly difficult to win road Ryder Cups. I was at that last Ryder Cup in Whistling Straits where the US just really steamrolled them from start to finish. But I think we might be talking about Luke Donald and the team of assistant captains that he's put together, like the same way that we talk about Sevy's and Jose Maria Olazabal's impact on the Ryder Cup in the 70s and 80s. Like I think Luke Donald and Dodo have touched on something both quantifiable with the statistical edge that they're formulating and like the chemistry aspect of putting together a team that really loves it and gets it and likes each other. I'd be pretty worried if I was the United States. I really would.
I'm with you. I think if anything, the Team USA is a little overpriced currently. In a lot of,
Agreed.
I haven't looked at anything in the last like week or so, but I don't know. If you think that they're like 65, 70% to win, and I'm not sure the markets have it that high, but I think Europe, this thing's probably going to trend towards a coin flip, would be my guess. It's not just some of the stats and like pairings in the team chemistry. I think just Europe does a much better job with preparation
Agreed.
when you show up, knowing who you're probably going to partner with, just the peace of mind and the confidence that comes with a lot of that. They're way more dialed. I think there's a chance that Keegan Bradley's a disaster. Everyone's all excited about him from the beginning. I have been like, hold on. Team USA has been so far from the right formula with some of the stuff that matters that Dodo Molinari is good at. Like you can be excited about a Team USA rebrand, but that doesn't mean they're going to get any of that stuff right. Like I
Mhm.
don't, if they're making massive mistakes with pairings, which I think they will likely do, there's probably not going to be enough of a margin. Like Rory and Rahm and Ludwig, I mean, those are going to be potentially three of the best players in that event, right? You
Yeah.
got Hatton, potentially Hovland.
Hatton and Hovland. Fleetwood, I don't think like Beth Page is the perfect fit for Fleetwood, but he's a very proven useful rider.
The Hoygaards
Yeah.
could do something. Like there's talent on Europe. So yeah, I think we could be talking about this. If you give Team Europe a little bit of an edge on some of the margins, like they're going to make some better decisions, the talent could be pretty close. I agree with you on the home fields going to the USA. Like, but I think we could be talking about this as pretty close to a coin flip. That's where my head is right now. But again, a lot's going to change.
By the way, and I'm not saying that these players are necessarily as good or will be as good as your Clantons, Dunlaps, Sahiths, Akshays, Davis Thompsons, those guys we talk about in terms of the next wave of American stars. But Team Europe has a pretty fun pipeline too.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually really trust Dodo and Luke Donald and the European Brain Trust to make some pretty sound course management decisions based on how they fill out that roster. Like you think about the top 6 of Europe, again, feel pretty safe, right? Rory, Rahm, Ludwig, Victor Hovland, Tyrrell Hatton, Tommy Fleetwood. Those 6 feel pretty
Maybe
safe.
not Hovland. Let's not lock in Hovland.
Okay. That's fine. I will give you not Hovland. How do you feel about Lowry and Matt Fitzpatrick going forward?
Lowry's been good, man. Fitzpatrick's like a little confusing, but
Mhm.
I always kind of trust that he'll figure it out. I don't have a strong opinion on either of those necessarily. I mean, dude,
Yeah.
honestly, Sergio might bring something to the table this year, even though
I
he's
was
getting older.
I was gonna go in a different direction. What about if Tom McKibben's really good, right? You wanna talk about a distance bias golf
Mhm.
course? What if David Puig I mean, what does another step forward look like in live if you're David Puig? But like, I think David Puig is talented as hell and could be a huge asset at the back end of your team, especially if like Rahm has some sort of relationship with him and can mentor him along the way, maybe in the same way that Rory would be able to mentor Tom McKibben. But you have these 2 bombers in David Puig and Tom McKibben that are absolutely brimming with talent, with like your natural countrymen in John Rahm and Rory McIlroy that can kind of mentor them along the way. Plus you mix in like they get the veterans right, like Sepp Straka and Nikolai Hojgaard, like that they usually do a pretty good job of Justin Rose, like they usually do a pretty good job of finding the right pieces to fill out the back end of that roster in terms of guys that are kind of like spot starters that can get you the point if they're utilized correctly. I totally have so much more confidence in the way that Europe navigates those decisions than I do with the US. And I'm probably a little bit higher on Keegan than you. And I still think like I trust that brain trust so much more.
Also, I just of those names you mentioned, I think Rasmus Højgaard is one to keep
Mhm.
an eye on. Like coming
Mhm.
off the DP World Tour, has his PJ Tour card, really strong year last year, and he was kind of always the better of the 2 Højgaards in his amateur career. I think he has a very good chance of being a contributor to that team.
Anything else? That was my final Ryder Cup one. Anything else you're buzzing on for 2025?
Only other one I had, an honorable mention storyline. Uh, I've already planted this flag and I want to keep doing it. Bring the smoke. There are going to be more 59s on tour this year. I think we're past a tipping point where those used to be cool and they're not cool anymore. We've already mentioned distance being completely out of balance with how the game is supposed to be, but I'm going to predict that in 2025, we get 3 or more 59s. I think Amex, Sony, Wyndham, Travelers, John Deere. You catch those courses on a soft day, it's in range. These guys are optimized with their TrackMan numbers. I think we're going to be past the tipping point of where getting put on 59 watch is just not even cool. I already think we're there, and we're going to get more of them this year. So that's my prediction. We've never had more than 2 in a year, I believe. I'm looking at it right now. But We've been having way more of them recently. Can't figure out why. I think we're gonna get some this year.
Even that first week, I mean, I know the guys are a little bit disadvantaged because Kapalua is a par 73, but the final round scoring average at Kapalua, which I don't know why it's a par 73 because one of those par fives plays to a scoring average of like 0.4, 0.26. That golf course played over 6 strokes under par in the fight, which what does that even mean anymore? But I'm with you. I think that this modern version of the PGA Tour has not caught up to the technological advances and distance gains from PGA Tour players that we are currently seeing. So this was a blast, man. What do you have going on in 2025? Anything you're excited about for the upcoming year? I'm a big consumer of the fried egg. I watch, read, and listen to pretty much everything you guys put out. But for some of the listeners that may not be familiar with your other day job, anything else you're excited to share?
I think it'll be a good year. I'm going to be doing some different stuff this year. So I think I'm going to be doing a weekly Wednesday column that I'm excited about, like a
Sweet.
mix of commentary around the top players in the world, some course management stuff, and maybe answering some user questions. So
Cool.
I think that'll be fun. And I'm going to be doing that, and then probably some more YouTube stuff. So hopefully getting in the weeds a little bit on certain golf courses, certain players, major championship stuff. So those are probably the two things. And then continuing to write in the newsletter. So yeah, that's probably the gist of the content plan for 2025.
Love that. Well, you remain one of my favorite friends to talk golf with, so I'm sure we'll get together a couple more times before the year is said and done. And thanks for joining me today, my man.
Thanks for having me. Congrats on the launch. I'm very excited to follow along, and I will be supporting.
Thanks, buddy.